Select using color. So a couple of my favorite tools that I want to show you. Number one is the Magic Wand tool, which is underneath our Quick Selection tool. The Magic Wand tool has been around for quite a while in Photoshop, and it was everyone's favorite for a long time. So the Magic Wand tool, when I select it, I'll get some options up here at the top. The ones I'm most concerned about, number one being tolerance. Tolerance tells me how similar in color pixels must be in order to be selected. So my tolerance is from 0 to 255. The lower the tolerance, the closer then I need my colors to be in order for them to be selected. By default, Photoshop uses a tolerance of 32. So I can keep that 32, or I can play around with my tolerance. The other option I have here is Anti-Alias. Anti-Alias, if you remember, tells me if it's going to smooth my edges, or if I have it unchecked, it'll be just ragged. It'll be pixels on, pixels off, and look fairly rough. I'm going to turn it on. Contiguous basically allows me to select pixels next to one another. If I have that checked, if I don't have that checked, it'll make kind of a selection in various parts of my image. Sample all layers, if I have that checked, it will select pixels from all of my layers. And then once I have a selection, I'll be able to utilize the refine edge, which gives me an easy way to improve my edge quality. At the very left of the options bar up here, we have our normal mode, but then we also have an add to selection, subtract from selection, and intersect with selection. What those options allow me to do is use my tool to either click again to keep adding or click to delete sections. So using my Magic Wand, I'm going to click right in the center here of my flower, and you can see what was selected. So by having contiguous off, I'm going to Control D to deselect and click one more time. Now do you see that it selected more of a range because they didn't have to be connected. My pixels didn't have to be one next to each other. So it's probably better to have that unchecked. Tolerance, it did not get all of my yellow. You can see little areas here of pixels that were outside of that tolerance of 32, meaning, I wasn't tolerant to give that big of a range. So if I increase my tolerance, I'm going to deselect. Let's increase my tolerance to maybe 50, and I'll click again. Do you see how I have more of my objects selected? Let's do a reversal. Control D to deselect. This time let's have a tolerance of only 5. And click kind of in that same area again. Do you see how now I have hardly any pixels actually selected because I'm only tolerant of that color. If I turn the contiguous on, I'm going to deselect and now click. I'm only going to get that one pixel right where I clicked because within the outside edges of it, I'm not tolerant of that color change. So that's a way to see. Now most of the time this tool is used for solid color. So instead of clicking inside of my multicolored object, I would look at a solid color like my white. If I click on the white here, almost everything in the white is selected. Then I would do a select and inverse right up here at the top. It would inverse that, so now I have my flower selected. So a few versions back, a new tool was introduced called the Quick Selection tool. This tool now has overtaken the favorite tool, I think, by most Photoshop users. So how we used the Magic Wand and click, had some options, got partially, probably needed some more additional work. The Quick Selection allows me to click and drag, kind of paint areas, and this then I can just click and drag. If I get into a smaller area, I can change my brush size because it does go off of the size of your brush. And you can see just by clicking and kind of dragging through, there I go, I have my object selected. So if you become more efficient with this, it ends up being a pretty quick option. The last piece I want to share with you is actually a color selection that we can do from the select menu, and this would be select and color range. So select and color range works very similar to my magic wand where I had a tolerance. For whatever reason, they call it fuzziness in the color range dialog box. So fuzziness really is tolerance. The lower the value, then the closer the colors must be. And the higher the fuzziness, the more tolerant, okay? So now I can actually sample up areas on my thumbnail. I can go out here. So if I sample my white, you can see the white is selected. If I increase my fuzziness, I'm getting more tolerant and I'm picking up some of the light areas inside. Now if I go back here and click on the yellow instead, look at that, hardly anything. If I increase my fuzziness, you can start to see the pixels that will become selected as I become more tolerant. Now the problem here is if I go extreme, sometimes I get extras and sometimes I don't get everything. So while this is selected, let's click OK. So now you can see that my flower, I've got some things, not quite everything. So I can add to a selection and all of the tools actually work together. So a lot of times we might start with either the magic wand or the quick selection tool, then go over to the lasso tool, and by holding down my shift key, now if you watch this area here in the top left, holding my shift key, do you see how it toggles to that second option, which means to add to selection? So instead of me actually pressing these buttons up here, I press Shift and then use my lasso to clean up. It's sort of my cleanup tool. I get a little plus sign next to my icon, and what I just did is surround it in a not a very clean way. I just am able to encompass those pixels that are not selected, and now I have them all selected, and I can actually go around this whole thing, and you can see how I'm gradually getting the rest of my pieces selected. Now here a little bit more, and typically you're going to zoom in. If you're working with selections here, you can see there's still some stray pixels over here. You're going to be zoomed in at almost a pixel editing level. So if I go in here and just kind of drag around, there we go, we got the rest of it. What happens is, whoops, if I went too far, well, I can use my Alt key. See how I have a minus sign? So Alt subtracts, and I'll just do this kind of sloppy so you can see. And a lot of times I don't take the time to close it because I know it's going to draw a straight line back to my beginning point. And there we go. So Shift always will add, Alt will subtract, and we can mix and match some of these selection tools to get the best result.